So I am here with Jodi Shaw. Jodi, thanks so much for coming on my podcast.
Oh, thank you for having me, Sasha.
Yeah, I'm really excited. I've been wanting to talk to you, for a couple months now. You came out with a video 2 months ago. I'm looking at it right now on my phone. It's called Dear Smith College, I Have a Few Requests. And this was your first video, right?
Yes, my first video.
And in this video, you sat down, you were so candid, and this video now has 67,000 views. This obviously struck a nerve. Now, for people who don't know, could you tell us sort of what led you up to the process of sitting down and making that video?
Oh boy. Well, I can tell you what I didn't do. I didn't just wake up and say, I'm going to make a video today. It was kind of a long journey to get there. Um, so I started working at Smith College in 2017. And when I arrived to campus, there was a lot of messaging around race and specifically around systemic racism, that it's a big issue and a big problem, and it's a problem on campus and everywhere. And that as a white person, I can help this problem by talking about whiteness and white privilege, and that I can somehow alleviate the systemic racism in some way by doing that. And I believed that, and I thought, well, I want to be good, and Smith must know this stuff. I mean, I'm not an academic. I guess, I'm going to do this, and I want to help. And so I was, participating in this, and then about a year after I started, there was an incident on campus with a Black student and a white staff member. The Black student accused the white staff member of engaging in a racially motivated incident. And so even before the college initiated an investigation into this incident, they immediately apologized to the student. They immediately started talking about systemic racism on campus and how this is so wrong. And they started implementing programs and initiatives to combat this racism on campus. So again, before and also during the investigation, they did this. And then even after the investigation found that there was no evidence of racial bias. And anyone who actually looks at that report would be hard pressed to argue that there was racial bias. And anyone knowing the full context and details, they continued on with this narrative that there's so systemic racism on campus, and we need to fight it, and we need to do X, Y, and Z. So the reason I mention that is because when I was in the library, right after that incident, I was just getting ready to do a huge presentation for 600 incoming first-year students. I had worked for months on it. I had been tasked with, it was a library orientation for incoming students. And I had been told, please do something crazy. Please do something wild and crazy. We'll give you this large concert hall if you just do something crazy. Do not make, just a boring slideshow show about the card catalog. And I mean, if you think about it, and a library orientation is not the most interesting information to convey. And it is quite boring. Unless you're a librarian, I guess, and you get jazzed by it. So I decided to do a rap, and I have a musical background, a lot of experience putting on events. And so that's what I had pretty much spent all of late spring and summer working on exclusively. So this incident happened with the student and the staff member. And about a month later, my supervisor approached me and he said, you know what, you can't do this. You can't do this rap. And I asked him why. And he said, because you're white. And so I remember, I was a little shocked, and I said, well, if I was a person of color, would I be allowed to do it? And he said, yes, without any hesitation. And which I think is interesting looking back, because I didn't specify what color. I just said a person of color, meaning a non-white person. So clearly it's only off limits because of I'm white. So this was shocking. And I didn't really know what to do. I was still had in my head like, oh, you're a white person, you have white privilege, and is this racial discrimination? I'm not sure. Clearly, looking back, it was. It was put in an email. Nobody argued that this didn't happen. But the fact that he felt so like without hesitation did this, just it was kind of intimidating. Like, oh, I can't really report this because people will think I'm a white supremacist and that I don't understand that white people have privilege, and there's a lot of torment going on. Cut to, I ended up leaving the library in large part for that, and moving into residence life, where I thought into an admin support position. So I was no longer a librarian, and I thought I was kind of would be able to avoid. I'd now become by now very leery of these discussions and talking about whiteness against this backdrop of this highly by now racially charged atmosphere on campus, where this incident had happened and the college was supporting this narrative, and now something had happened to me because you're white. And just this whole narrative of whiteness and white privilege, I just really was trying to keep my head down and my mouth shut. And I thought by moving into an admin support position, I would kind of be safe from that. But I kind of jumped into the frying pan, I guess, as they say, kind of. And it was more so there, like more demands that I talk about race, and also that I kind of analyze student conflict through the lens of race, as opposed to the facts of the conflict, like taking into account the student's race first and assigning them status and privilege or lack thereof. And so this started really bothering me, and it ended up that I went to a training, and I finally just abstained. I said, I'm not comfortable talking about my race. It was a mandatory training, and I was shamed in front of my colleagues. The facilitators made a comment about white people who abstain are committing a power play. And that felt very humiliating to me. And it was at that point, I decided to file an internal complaint. The internal complaint was investigated. The college, but then and George Floyd was killed, and they upped the ante. There were more initiatives, more demands that white people talk about race. White people are especially responsible for dismantling racism. All this talk about white people, I mean, just the extreme focus on it. And that's when I started sending emails. I really tried to have a discussion with college admin about this, that this felt very destructive and divisive to me and was not the right path. And I was ignored. Those emails were ignored. And the reason I made the video, I had been thinking about it, is because really I didn't want to go to, we were supposed to have a discussion the week after I made the video. We're supposed to have a discussion about this document toward racial justice Smith. And I just was terrified. I just did not want to go. And at that point, it'd been made clear to me that even abstaining was a power play or upholding white supremacy in some way. So I didn't even feel like I could call in sick. I thought I would be like seen as suspicious. And I debated, like, do I speak up? Do I say something? Do I not go? Like, what do I do? And I was just so anxious about it. It just felt like it had to come to a head in some way. And so that's why I decided to make the video. I made the video, and it definitely came to a head, and they ended up canceling that meeting. There were actually two meetings. They ended up so I guess it worked in that small way that I didn't have to go to those meetings.
Yeah, so you achieved that at least.
Yeah, sorry, that was really long-winded, but I just, there's so many parts to it that
Right, there are so many pieces here. How did you feel when you made the video? Did you feel any sense of relief when you had said it, when you turned off the camera?
Yeah, I did, actually. I really did. And I still feel that sense of relief now, because it felt like I was trapped. And it felt like I was whispering in hallways with colleagues about it. And they were coming to me too, like, this is really bothering me. And it feels really good to be out, I guess, I feel like I've come out of the closet, and there is a huge relief to that. And also feeling like preserving the last shred of integrity I had. I feel like I've kind of restored my integrity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, if there's something that you're known for now, I think it's that. I think it's having integrity and honesty. So now what happened after that? What was the reaction like? It must have been overwhelming.
Yeah, it was. I remember not knowing what was going to happen. I thought, well, maybe 2 people will see it and nothing happens. And then I have to go to deal with these meetings next week and life goes on. Or it could be something big. And I remember that night I was watching TV with my family and I checked and it was like, oh, like it's been an hour and 500 people watched it. Okay. And then 15 minutes later, it was 1,000 people, and so that night I started getting more and more like, I guess it was adrenaline or just like, oh my gosh, this is actually something's happening here. And, sorry, I forgot the question.
Just how did the outpouring of reaction feel?
Yeah. So I'm going to go back. So I was watching TV with my family and I remember checking it after an hour and it was like 500 people. And then 15 minutes later, it was 1,000. And then at the 2-hour mark, it was like 3,000. I thought, okay. Then I knew, okay, people are sharing this and I just felt like it just got very real for me. And there's a sense of Smith being like, I mean, it's my employer, they pay my paycheck. But they kind of feel like it feels like it is a powerful institution. They have a $2 billion endowment. So it felt like a big deal. Mm-hmm. And I went to work the next day and some people had not. I texted a friend, I was like, did you see the video? And she's like, no, so clearly like it's still hadn't gotten around at Smith yet. I think it became really real when the president issued a letter 2 days after I released it, saying that I did not speak. This individual does not speak for any part of the college, and that was a little like, whoa, like that's wrong, because I'm part of the college and I'm speaking for me, so clearly I'm speaking for part of the college, and yeah, but she never actually reached out to me, and that's something that a lot of people have asked. Like, did she actually? Because when I made the video, I made a lot of versions. Like I practiced, like I spent like hours, like, and a lot of them were very angry because I was so angry. And I got that. I'm glad I got that out of my system, was able to make a calm video because I thought I'm going to have faith that this video is going to and open up a dialogue. Like I'm hoping that this will, in a way, be a catalyst to finally have an honest dialogue about what it is we're talking about when we talk about race and why are we talking about it and what is the goal? What are we hoping to achieve? Are we achieving that? Is the way we're doing it actually effective? I really, really was a good faith effort. And so that's how, when I made the video, that's how I felt like I was trying to be really receptive and open. And that's why I was disappointed. I was disappointed when I saw the letter from the president, but I made it an immediate response to her. I still treating it like, okay, I'm going to treat this as her way of opening a dialogue and trying to point out where we agree, that we agreed on some things. And she didn't respond. So that's when I kind of get the impression now I'm still open to Smith. It doesn't have to be with me, but just in general, having a community dialogue about what are we doing? Like what this doesn't feel right. And how can we do it better?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What struck me the first time that I saw that video, your first video, was that you just seemed, you sounded tired. Like you just sounded like someone who didn't really want to be having to do this, but you were doing it anyway. And I think that lent you a great deal of credibility because you weren't someone who was going, hey, I want to be on camera. I want to get all this attention on me. It was really the opposite of that. It was like you had been driven to this.
Yes, very much so. I really, really it really did feel like the last resort. I really didn't want it to come to that. And I think anybody who sees the paper trail leading up to that of my efforts, like really trying to, I mean, even before I filed a complaint, I tried talking to supervisors about it, and even, yeah, just about how the effects I felt it had on students. That was on deaf ears. And then it got to a point where I was like, okay, if we're not going to have a real discussion about that, then I don't want to be talking about my race anymore in this environment, and then even that was on kind of deaf ears, like, you have to, it's part of your job. Yeah, I think I was pretty worn out by the time I got there. I mean, it's tiring, Sasha, like it's tiring, like feeling scared all the time and afraid you're going to say the wrong thing, and feeling like you're in a way you're lying, or you're by complying and going along with something you think is wrong. It's really exhausting.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's go back to that meeting, the bias training, where you tried to abstain and it was, if I'm remembering right, you were being asked to speak about your whiteness in relation to your childhood. I think it was, right? And you didn't want to, and then that later was brought up and used against you. Can you just tell us what happened that day?
It was a professional development retreat that was mandatory. And I knew the first day was going to be devoted to discussing our quote social identities. And at Smith, it's pretty clear that race is a really big aspect of one's identity. That's how it's seen. So I'd approached my director the month prior and said, I really don't feel comfortable discussing my race at work. And she said, oh, well, that's fine. Just like, and I'm worried about this professional development retreat. And she said, that's fine. Just say that at the retreat. Just say you're not comfortable. And I thought, oh, okay, great. Problem solved. So at the retreat, the question was, I have it somewhere. I'm paraphrasing. It was, please talk about your understanding about your race / culture. Like, so that's not even clear. Is the race supposed to be the same as culture? In the context of growing up. And then it was really a 3-part question: growing up, your young adulthood, and I think your college years or something like that. And so everyone went around the table and talked about them growing up. And, I'm an introvert, I think. And it just feels strange to me even to be talking about the childhood part it's different when it's informal, like talking to your colleagues, but like in a professional development workshop, like talking about your childhood at work, just even that. So let alone the race component. So when it got to me, I was the last person, and I said, I'm not comfortable discussing that at work. And that was all I said. And then, yes, later, one of the facilitators, there were 2 facilitators, said, and again, I'm paraphrasing, she said, any white person who expresses discomfort in discussing their race, she said, you might feel like you want to comfort them, but don't, because it's not actually discomfort, it's a power play. She said, no, it's white fragility, and it's a power play. So there's so many, I mean, even if we weren't talking about race, to tell a group of people that a feeling that somebody's just expressed is not valid. That's basically what she was doing. Like, you don't believe this person. It's not valid. And it's not valid because they're white and they're saying it. It was so shocking to me. My heart dropped. I felt completely humiliated. There was an awkward silence. Nobody said anything. There were 2 supervisors in the room. I couldn't even respond. I couldn't even say anything. And there was something else that happened at that meeting as well. In the beginning, we were asked to go around the room and talk about how comfortable we are working in teams. And they didn't define teams. So I'm a musician, and I love working with bands, for example, and I feel like I work well with a band, but I don't, like in an office setting, And I think I said that. I think I said in an office setting, I actually prefer to work independently. Like I'm not that comfortable working in teams. I could do it, you know. And so that later turned out to feel like a trick, because later we were given a handout in which it's called characteristics of white supremacy. And one of the characteristics is discomfort working with teams, or in individualism is called. And then one of the symptoms is discomfort working in teams. So it felt, yeah, I have this handout, and this handout's actually been circulated before. It's been used in other trainings and somebody's leaked it. It's out there, and it's like pretty much like characteristics of that would kind of help ensure somebody is successful in life. Like, and I'm not saying like somebody who's not comfortable working in teams, it would necessarily be successful, but there's all kinds of things like, worship of the written word, just like speaking the proper English, objectivity, just characteristics that actually it can be seen as positive things. You know, we're all listed as
disturbed by that worship of the written word is there, since I'm a literature person and nerd. That makes me uncomfortable.
Yeah, like at first I was like, these seem like totally random things to be pulling out. And then I realized they're all kind of like, they're not bad things, you know? And what do they imply? Do they imply that people who don't enjoy reading or I don't, that handout it's out there in the internet somewhere. You can find it. But I also felt, now we've created this environment, this so-called, you know, workshop, where we're supposed to be having an authentic discussion, where I've been told not only that my feelings are not valid and I don't have somebody else has the power to interpret my reality for me, but also that certain characteristics about me are somehow upholding white supremacy, ergo racist, I would think. That doesn't feel like a setting that's going to be a quote unquote safe place for people to actually divulge real feelings. That sets a precedent for making things very like, oh gosh, like walking on eggshells, like the threat of public humiliation.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. This is like just this something popped into my head. I don't know if I should say this, but I can't remember whose quote this is. It might be Malcolm X. He said, "There's nothing more dangerous than a Black man with a library card in America." And it's just like, you know, what about this idea of bringing reading to people who didn't have access to it? Because I understand if they're making the point that at this point in time, the worship of the written word, as they put it, is somewhat exclusive or limited to who gets to have that in their life. But isn't the goal to sort of expand that rather than say that that is somehow inherently tied to whiteness?
Yeah, it really feels like, yeah, I get what you're saying. It's like, wouldn't we want to pull people or yeah, expand and empower people instead of removing it from everybody?
Right.
It reminds me of like when I was watching TV one time about the news about, it was a union and they were fighting for pensions and they were protesting, they were on strike. And somebody, I don't know who I was with, made a comment like, well, that's pretty selfish. Like, other people don't have pensions, you know, like why should they, like they're being selfish. And I thought, well, so that's a very interesting way of looking at it. Like, so let's take away the pensions from the people who have them. So then we're all quote unquote equal, when really, like, if we set a precedent that, okay, these people have a pension, then then more people should have the pension too. And then go from that viewpoint. It really does feel, and that's in a way, I wonder about the word equity. Like, I've asked Smith for a definition of that word and I have not gotten one, but it feels almost like the way we're achieving equity is like to pull everyone into a like place where they're where everyone's disempowered, and then that's equity, and it feels very backwards.
Yeah. Are you familiar with the story Harrison Bergeron, I think it's called? I may
No.
be getting the name somewhat wrong. I think it's by Ray Bradbury, and it's a short story with kind of a dystopian where everyone has to be handicapped so that no one is better than anyone else. So it's like there's a couple watching TV, they're watching a ballet on TV, and the ballerina has to wear weights because she's too graceful and,
Wow. Yeah. That's kind of what it feels like, right? Do you think so?
Well, I've been thinking about that story a lot lately when I hear stuff like this. And the idea that list is a list of things that are tied to white supremacy or something, it's like this kind of brings us to what you call neo-racism, where they're saying, so are they saying that it's something that's actually inherent to white people that they read?
Yeah, that's the other thing, because think about the opposite. Is it inherent to non-white people that they don't read or that they don't worship the written word? Like, is that, or if they do, then they're upholding white supremacy? I'm just pulling it up here. Yeah, so quantity over quality, worship of the written word. It's weird too, because like they have in here paternalism, which feels like many of the policy, like even the president's response to me, there was a line at the end about, and for our students of color, we want to assure you we are here for you and we support you. That feels kind of very paternalistic to me, like as if they're helpless or they need extra help over somebody else because if they watch this video, they're going to be harmed in some way or they can't handle it. Just the message there. I mean, some people would call it soft bigotry.
Right.
Right.
It's also a stereotype that Black fathers are not present. It's a racist stereotype that's often used by people, that's, I think, has been used by people on the right. It almost sounds the same to me, saying that paternalism is something that doesn't work with dismantling white supremacy. It's like saying that paternalist values don't go with people of color.
I don't follow you.
Well, so paternalism is one of the bad values, right? It's like a white supremacist value.
Oh, yeah. Listed in this sheet. Yeah.
So if paternalism, if we think of it as on sort of a family scale, paternalism would be like having a father figure. And there's this stereotype that Black families often don't have fathers, that the fathers leave. So when I hear that, it sounds like they're almost making a nod to that stereotype, like paternalism. But I'm thinking of paternalism in a more positive way, of like having a father figure. It's not something that they get to have.
Right. They're yeah, and they're definitely making it into a negative thing about like power.
Anything else popping out at you from the list?
Yeah, I was just looking at paternalism.
Okay.
Well, the way like fear of open conflict, in the individualism, desire for individual recognition and credit, like little experience or comfort working as part of a team. It's just interesting, little experience. So I'm not clear on what that means. The right to comfort, the belief that those with power have a right to emotional and psychological comfort. So does that mean people with power, first of all, it's just how are you defining power? Who are the people you're talking about? And why wouldn't they, like, is this, like, does that imply that if you don't have power, then you do have a right to emotional, like, why wouldn't anyone not have a right. I guess I don't even know if it's a right. I mean, but in talking about human rights, but why wouldn't everyone have the right to seek comfort and have comfort as a human being? Scapegoating, and some of them are ironic, scapegoating those who cause discomfort. I'm guessing that I have caused some discomfort by making my video. And I feel scapegoated in a way. Equating individual acts of unfairness against white people with systemic racism, which daily targets people of color. I'm not even clear on what that means. And then it says, understand that discomfort is at the root of all growth and learning. Welcome it as much as you can. Deepen your political analysis of racism and oppression so you have a strong understanding of how your personal experience and feelings fit into a larger picture. Don't take everything personally. So, yeah, understand discomfort. I mean, there's so little room for discomfort at Smith, it feels like. So little tolerance for it. And encouraging students to frame discomfort as something that has to do with their race or microaggressions, that kind of thing. Like if you're like, I feel like we could be helping empower students by being able to tolerate discomfort and understand this, ironically, that it is kind of the root of growth, discomfort, and that it's not a bad thing. And it doesn't necessarily mean that somebody's committing racism because you're uncomfortable. I wish we could, I just wish our message to students was more empowering than I feel that it is right now.
Yeah. Like you said in that first video, that you want the college to stop telling young girls of color that they are only ever oppressed, and to stop telling young white girls that they are only ever oppressors.
Yeah, that really bothers me. And I'm sure they would say, well, we don't always do that. But it's a very strong messaging and strong belief system. And I couldn't quite put my finger on, I've always felt like it's very disempowering because it sets up, and it also sets up a dependency dynamic by telling white students and white staff that if you go to these discussions and if you acknowledge your white privilege and talk about your whiteness in this certain specific way, then somehow that's going to help people of color because it's going to somehow have an impact on systemic racism. That feels like the message to people of color is, well, you're kind of screwed unless people who are white do these actions. Like if a white person does X, then Y will happen for a person of color. And that feels really racist to me. It feels racist and it doesn't feel healthy, like setting up this kind of weird dependency. And for a long time, I didn't have the language to describe this disempowering message, but I read, I read on it's called Critical Therapy Antidote. It is a group of professionals who are seeking to preserve the talk therapies from this indoctrinating kind of this ideology. And mind you, they don't necessarily seek to squash the ideology. They just, want human beings to be able to decide their own belief systems instead of imposing one. So there was an article on there by Lisa Marciano, and she's a psychotherapist, and she talks about locus of control. And that was the language I needed. So people who, the locus of control inside of you means you have agency, you feel responsible for your actions, and you make your own choices. That's when your locus of control is internal, as opposed to an external locus of control, which posits that your destiny is kind of dependent on external factors, and one of them being race, for example. And so I feel like that's what we are encouraging is students to develop an external locus of control. And so in addition to me feeling like I'm asked to engage in racially prejudicial behavior towards students, like this is all part and parcel of that your destiny is not necessarily determined by you, or it's not inside you don't have agency. And I feel, and in this article, she talks about how people whose have a strong internal locus of control generally have better outcomes in terms of mental health and quality of life versus, I mean, both are kind of necessary, like to have, but I think it's not healthy to be pushing that to be an external.
Right.
Yeah. So that's always troubled me. And now I have the language. It's locus of control.
Right. So have you heard from any Smith students?
Yeah, I have heard from students. I've heard from a lot of alums, both alums from a long time ago and very recent alums. I've heard from alums who are very upset with me, but I've heard from more alums directly who are very supportive of me and also writing to me to tell me their experience at Smith, for example. Mm-hmm. And there was somebody made a comment on a YouTube page. I have to go look at it. She said, I think she was the head of some organization at Smith. I don't know if it was the Black Student Alliance. I don't know what it was, but she said, thank you so much for making this video because I always hated the soft bigotry at Smith. And so that felt validating, I guess, because I don't like the soft bigotry either. And I don't like being expected to participate in it. And then just, alums who, thank you and keep going. Yeah. So, and current students. Yeah. What's interesting is, so I had a student write to me right after the video, and she said, I just want you to know that not all of us here at Smith think that Smith's methods of quote unquote achieving racial justice are good, or we're not on board with it. And so we're with you. And that meant a lot to me to get that email in a slew of other emails to the department, which were, please terminate Jodi Shaw. So those little emails mean a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's really something to that. The idea that for students who are silently thinking, what's going on, this soft bigotry or this neo-racism, I didn't know that term until I heard you say it. And I think it's so apt. It really describes the situation because we're putting all this emphasis on who's speaking, the skin color of the person who's speaking, not what they're saying.
Yeah.
And there's something really powerful in that for a student to hear you speaking up and just the steadiness of your voice. Is there a sense, I mean, what's the feeling on the Smith campus lately or in the past couple of years? Is it a feeling of conformity, of, people numbing their own individual thoughts to go along with it? Or is that, off base?
Well, geez, I mean, for staff, since that incident happened, I know for me, my experience is a lot of whispering in hallways. At least maybe that was just me because I was trying to make connections and figure out whether I'm going crazy or not. Like, am I a racist? What's going on here? Like, for a while I didn't know what was going on. I know that one of the faculty did a study, and I wish I should have prepped if I'd known I was going to be talking about it, but it was a survey of Smith students, and I think it was like 5 years ago or something, and then today, just measuring how students feel about freedom of speech. and also like where students position themselves on the political spectrum. And like 5 years ago, it was like, of course, it was like most of the students were liberal, but I forget the exact numbers. Maybe it was 60% or 70% liberal, and how the attitude toward freedom of speech. And he was very surprised 5 years later. He knew it had shifted, like just he could tell, but he didn't know how much. I mean, it's like 90 something percent liberal. I may be misquoting it. And a lot more students do not think people should have freedom of speech, like totally freedom of speech. Like it should be limited in some ways. And so it was a little, he said he was very surprised by it. And so that's like a real measure of what's going on campus. And I've always felt like, I mean, the Republican Club just closed down, I think this summer or last semester. I've always felt a lot of empathy for students who they come to the college not conforming, or even like say a Trump voter, for example, like just how it must feel for them to be hiding, because, and I assume that most of them are, maybe I shouldn't make that assumption, but yeah, I just really feel for those students, because here we have a liberal arts college, which is supposed to be like a pluralism, the unfettered exchange of ideas, like freedom of speech. I mean, how can that possibly happen when there's so much fear that if you say anything that's not totally lockstep party line with the prevailing, I'm going to call it orthodoxy, then you can be shunned, and the power, that social media is such a big influence on young adults' lives, and that's where they will get hammered. I really feel for those students, and I don't think that, and I would like to, in my quest to improve working conditions, which is what this entire conversation is about, to be clear, I wish that we could talk about that and say, how can we serve all of these students who, I remember Kathy McCartney, the president, started off a meeting with my department or division. It was last spring, I believe, to talk about the COVID measures that we were going to be enacting. And she started off the meeting by saying, "Thanks for coming. I never thought I would be presiding over the college during a pandemic. And I think like she said, I know we all had hoped the election of 2016 would turn out differently." And I thought to myself, wow, like that she can say that is really something. And I just thought, I'm sure that not everybody on campus feels that way. I'm sure there are people who voted differently from Kathy McCartney, and for her to assume, or for her to feel like she can say that without any hesitation, is very, very troubling to me.
Yes. Mm-hmm. I mean, so as someone who was a Jill Stein voter back in 2016, I was also alienated by that comment in a bit of a different direction. But yeah, there's just no way that everybody supported the same candidate. That's insane.
Yeah, there's no way. And if they did, then I think we need to, like, if we're going to have a real conversation about diversity, then we need to maybe diversify a little bit. Yeah. It's just like the letter she wrote, which said this individual does not speak for any part of the college. And then the email she sent out to the provost, who then sent it on to all the faculty about the importance of stressing the importance of maintaining a unified message. Like, what is that about? Like, that is not liberalism. Mm-hmm. That is very much at odds with the values of liberalism. Right. And so in one way, it's like, okay, you're going to do that. If you're going to do that, if that's the thing, that we all have to maintain the same message and we all have to be on board with all of the same belief systems and politics, then let's be honest about it and say, hey, these are our beliefs. This is our belief system. And if you don't believe in it, you probably shouldn't come to Smith. Mm-hmm. I mean, let's just be honest. We are an activist organization. We're not really a liberal arts college. I mean, I don't know how one would word it,
Mhm.
but it's disturbing to put yourself off as one thing and then clearly it's another.
Right, right. And especially that inclusivity thing where inclusivity becomes a means of excluding many other people, which, you know, is something that I've experienced in terms of the gender debate, because when people talk about being inclusive of all gender identities, they end up excluding women and the female experience and the female language, female specific language. So that's something that I've run up against and noticed, like, wait a second, you're talking about inclusion and you're excluding half of the population now with your language. So that's one element of the hypocrisy at play here. And then I wanted to ask you if you're able to talk about what your employment status is now.
Yeah, I'm still on a paid leave.
Mhm.
I'm still under investigation.
Yeah.
Specifically for there were a number of allegations at that meeting, but the official word is just for a single email that I forwarded to myself, my home. I actually forwarded a bunch of emails. They were all about me, like please fire Jodi Shaw or denounce Jodi Shaw. And so they're claiming that I violated the Privacy Act or something, when in reality I did not share the emails and I was collecting them for, potential legal claim.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, and yet they like Hillary Clinton, but okay. Um,
That's it. Can we talk about that inclusivity thing? Because that's another thing, like there's a hypocrisy there. It's ubiquitous, this term inclusivity. But Smith College is an elite liberal arts institution. So you cannot be an elite liberal arts institution without, by default, excluding. I mean, we have an admissions process and we have standards and we exclude people who do not meet those standards. So if you're truly, I mean, if we're really talking about inclusivity here, then I would think we would go to a lottery system but then you don't get to say you're an elite. That's the whole nature of being elite, is that you exclude.
mhm.
So we've already selected our pool of people here. So to then talk about inclusivity seems a little bit at odds with
Right,
the notion of an elite liberal arts institution.
right, right. And then there's the disparity between sort of staff and faculty. So you're a member of the staff, you're not faculty, and there's a big difference there in terms of I'm going to use the word privilege, you know, in terms of
Yep.
the standing in the hierarchy of the elite institution. So yeah, can you talk a little bit about that? Just sort of how you feel being a staff member, being just a working person in all of this.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. As somebody pointed out to me, they were like, why do we have this distinction? Why is it dear students, staff, and faculty?
Mhm,
Because faculty are also staff,
mhm,
technically. Um, but that doesn't really bother me, but I just thought that was an interesting observation that faculty are staff. That distinction came into play after this incident happened on campus, and the college immediately began implementing or working towards a mandatory anti-bias training for staff,
Oh, okay.
not faculty, not students,
Mhm,
staff.
mhm,
And so that was an interesting distinction. And the message to me was that because we have a problem with racism amongst the staff. And as I talked about briefly in my first video, this is a very white area. You know, I moved up here from New York City, and I can tell you for sure, I was like, wow, I was just used to seeing different faces, and just to have so many white faces. And it's not a bad thing. It's just that's what Western Massachusetts, in this part of Western Massachusetts, is like, in this town. And so the pool that the college is pulling from for students, as an elite liberal art, we're choosing people from all over the world who apply. And it's similar with faculty. Faculty they move here for the job. They are flown in for interviews and then they move here to work here. So the amount of skin color diversity is going to be very different from that of staff because you're pulling from the local area. So if the local area is mostly white, so that's another distinction that I think gets lost in this discussion. That we're this focus on white privilege, white privilege, white privilege, when your largest group of paid employees is white, the staff is white mostly. So and also the lowest paid group. That's what I meant to say. Where the lowest paid, the people who get the smallest paychecks are mostly white on campus. And I think that the class discussion is, as far as I can tell, is completely absent. I don't see any discussions of class going on at all, for all the talk of intersectionality, which I also think is a very watered down version of intersectionality, because, intersectionality in the late 80s, early 90s, when I was learning about it, it was fascinating. And it was like, I thought, wow, this is like really interesting way of looking at the world. And I feel like somehow it's been reduced and flattened and squashed, very reductive jargon. And it's lost its teeth. It doesn't really mean anything anymore, which is unfortunate.
Yeah. Yeah, it feels like so many of these words that are thrown around, privilege, intersectionality, these types of words, they have lost their meaning in a way, because when they, through the way they're used, when they're just parroted, and when you literally have to say it, you're required to talk about these things in the correct way for your job, they just become meaningless phrases that people utter. I mean, they don't even know what's behind them. And I feel like I've been guilty of this in the past as a feminist, talking about patriarchy. And I've used the word patriarchy when I should have maybe actually tried to speak about what I meant by that, instead of just sort of that buzzword or that buzz phrase. And I feel like we keep hearing these being used more and more by people who, it's like, do you really know the meaning behind what you're saying, or are you just parroting it?
Yeah, that I feel that way too. Like at that professional development retreat, it felt that was the first place where I heard BIPOC, and I didn't know what it meant. And it was just being thrown around like everybody else in the room knew what it meant. And I'm like, these terms and phrases seem to enter the lexicon, and like we're all supposed to know what they mean. And if we don't, then that means somehow, oh, we're not like with it. And I feel like it's very jargony. I feel like that work. And I also feel like it feels
and the way they're introduced newly, and then you have to get on board, even if you don't yet understand it.
Right. Like some new terms appeared this summer, as far as I can tell, anti-Blackness. And I hadn't really heard the term anti-racism, I don't think, on campus before this summer, when George Floyd was killed. And I remember asking for definitions, asking the Office of Equity and Inclusion, could you explain what these things mean? I've noticed they're kind of just like we're all, they've entered our exchanges here at Smith, these official communications, but nobody's ever defined them. And I feel like if we're going to talk about something as complicated as race, I felt that way from the beginning too, like being asked to uphold this residence life curriculum. It feels like if we're going to go there, personally, I don't feel qualified, right? I'm not a faculty member. And I'm not getting paid. It's not my job description to create curriculum of any sort, really. They would argue that it is in my job description, but that's a standing argument, I guess. But especially that territory, it just feels like I don't want to be upholding a curriculum that just feels very like it's just jargony. And the department sends out these newsletters, like, and one was on cultural appropriation and one was on white privilege. And I remember the cited official sources for the content was like Jezebel magazine and Everyday Feminism. And those are like, those are like pop.
Mm-hmm.
They're not really authoritative sources. I mean, I'm a librarian, so I can say with some amount of, assurance that those are not really considered authoritative. And to be that kind of content, I feel like it really kind of does need to be authoritative. Like I would hope that you would understand it in a deeper way than that. And that's why I resist the being told that I'm supposed to. So I don't feel qualified to do that. And I feel uncomfortable pushing it as it is because it doesn't. And I remember asking my director one time, what is social justice? Like, what they gave me a book, and the very first line was about equal distribution of resources. It was like the very first line. I thought, okay, that's the end goal here. And I remember asking her, like, what is it? What and we weren't even 2 minutes in the conversation. She said, I don't really think about this that much. And I think what her intent was to like send me the message that you're overthinking it or something. And to me, that I was like, oh man, like this is serious stuff. Social justice, like that's a lot. And I really need to understand something if I'm expected to teach it or participate in creating a curriculum for it. Like I really need, and I don't feel like I have that understanding. And I don't feel like the college is giving me that. They're not even defining equity. They won't even define terms for me.
Wow.
So it's like, it's hard for me to get behind something when and I'm not clear that anyone actually has looked into it. It was suggested that I read Ibram X. Kendi's book to, quote, educate myself. But still, and then the next question is, okay, well, is that the official book that Smith College is using for its definitions? That's the next question.
Right. Mm-hmm. Did you read it? I haven't read anything by Ibram X. Kendi. Yeah.
No, I haven't read it. I just know the premise, as I've been told, about you're either an anti-racist or you're racist. Right?
There's no in between. Yeah, I've heard this as well.
There's no just not racist. There's no such thing.
Right.
I haven't read White Fragility either, but I've read excerpts from it. But I actually want to read it.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to better understand.
Yes, it can be so valuable to hear what is being said. I've been watching a lot of trans influencers on YouTube to hear what they're saying. And, some of them, I like them. Some of them are spreading misinformation. Well, all of them are spreading misinformation, but it's really valuable to hear what they're saying. And, I'm really struck by that. The college wanted you to sign on to your opinion to words that they wouldn't even define. That's really sinister.
Yeah. Well, yeah. You mean in terms of the residence life curriculum?
Mm-hmm.
They wanted me to support a curriculum that, yeah. And also it was deeper than that. I mean, it was my employment because they came out with this document called Toward Racial Justice at Smith. And granted, it was a living document, but in it, they said, we're going to be doing all these initiatives, like we're going to be looking at pay and whether or not people are compensated. I think they said equitably across registers of social identity, such as class, race, age, etc. And I don't know what that means, and then you're going to be evaluated according to your contributions to equity and inclusion, or they call it cultural competencies. Mm. What does that mean? Yeah. And then I go and I look in the handbook and there's not really any meat substance to the definitions. So I'm not clear. And that was another thing I talked to somebody about, and that's when he recommended I read Ibram X. Kendi. And then the next question is that the official book? And then the next question after that is, I'm a 35-hour per week employee. Am I expected to read books? Are you going to give me time during work to read this book? Are you going to have overtime? Like, is that what you want me to spend my time on, reading these books? Or should I be doing my job, which is much different from, yeah, it's a whole big can of worms, Sasha.
And I can imagine sort of for other staff, faculty, they either do or they don't read what they're supposed to read. But if they don't, I mean, and they're just staying silent about it, have they just adopted these things without really thinking about them?
Yeah, I think people are all over the spectrum on that.
Mm-hmm.
It's unclear to me, like that document toward racial justice at Smith, it was a 4-page document. And I remember reading it right away, and then a few weeks later, or maybe months later, I can't remember, someone in my department saying, "Can everyone please read this document?" And I was like surprised. I was like, "Well, hasn't everybody already read it?" And I found there was they quoted an article in it, and there was a misquote, and it was a fairly large one. They referred to I think they called it identity tax, but when I looked to the linked article, it was actually cultural taxation was the phrase. And so clearly even the person that wrote it, it was probably written by committee. I don't know. I'm guessing, but I'm not clear that did everybody even read that? Like, or is this at some point? Yeah. I wonder like how much of this is optics and how much of it is really meaningful. It doesn't feel meaningful or authentic to me,
Yeah.
but that's my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
I'm very uncomfortable in general with fakery. I just never been comfortable with it, or BS, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Not to say that what the college has released is BS. I'm not saying that. Just using it, common parlance way. Just the fakery detector. It doesn't feel. It just doesn't feel like it has. I don't know. I just really wish we could have authentic conversations, and I don't feel like we're having those. And I don't feel comfortable pretending that we're having them when we're not. And I'm certainly not going to feel comfortable revealing things about my childhood or my skin color in that kind of environment.
What's next for you, Jodi?
I don't know. I'm working with a couple of organizations. I am working, with a couple of foundations. I'm doing a lot of community building. That's something I'm really interested in because I feel like the first step is really for people who are in my situation who, I mean, a lot of people are wondering, am I racist? Like, because I feel like something wrong. Does that mean I'm racist? And it just really gets in your head. And I feel like I really want to be able to connect people with each other, perhaps even in their profession so that they can talk. And so, um, Helen Pluckrose has an organization in the UK called Counterweight that is doing that. And I have my own, like, some private listservs and chat platforms going on to connect people with each other, because I think when people can talk freely with each other, they can try to unravel and figure out what's going on here,
Mm-hmm.
what's real, and what's like kind of get reality checks. And then from there, they can figure out solutions to, what that works for them in their work situation so that there's not so much suffering
Yeah.
and feel comfortable. Maybe it's leaving the job. Maybe it's figuring out how to form a committee with other employees. Maybe it's making a video. I mean, that turned out to be something that I did, but certainly that's not going to be right for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Because the reality is people need their jobs. They need their paychecks. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's what I'm working on, community building. So if anybody out there is interested in, being on my listserv or my connections, they can write to me. And I'm also looking to raise some money for legal fees, because there is another staff member who is speaking out. She's very brave. And so we are raising money for our potential legal actions
Yeah.
against the college.
Yeah. Well, thank you for really helping open this conversation up and, help it break out into the mainstream. This is definitely something that is going to be an ongoing conversation. Now we've got Biden inaugurated as of yesterday, and he's already coming out. On his first day, he came out with this executive order that would be the topic of a whole nother hour and a half. But but thank you so much, Jodi. This was a great conversation.
Thank you so much, Sasha. And I'm really impressed with the work you're doing at Plebity. I really look forward to watching Plebity grow.
Yeah, it's exciting. It's the type of thing where I got cast out, and then now I'm trying to, like you're doing, really sort of stand firmly where I want to stand and try to help other people who are doing that and be.
Yeah. Have you been able to connect people and with each other, and I feel like
Um,
it's rewarding? And do you
yeah,
want to talk about this now on the podcast? I
yeah,
don't know.
sure. I mean, yeah, we can always.
Been for you? How's it been for you, Sasha, with Plebity? Like, how's it
Well,
going?
yeah, it's going good. The something exciting. We just yesterday announced the success of our first fund that we gave to someone, a free speech fund. So Marguerite Stern is a French feminist activist, and she's really someone who's thrown her whole life into the cause. She's like not just on Twitter, she's on the streets, and she has been hounded, to put it mildly, by trans activists. And she's out of apartment because she lived with other activists, out of a job. And so we were able to raise over $1,000 and send it to her for a short-term emergency fund for her. And that felt great. And, that was just completely crowdsourced. So they just saw and they understood and they donated. And so that was pretty amazing. And so we're just excited to do more. And we're looking for names of people who might be recipients. So if people are listening and they want to also get in touch with us and become part of that conversation. Yeah.
No,
Mhm.
that's great. I'm excited for Plebity.
Yeah. Well, maybe we'll get to do it if you are amenable. I would love to have you back.
Yeah. Yeah, I would like to come back, Sasha. Thank you.
Fly in any kind of weather, more than any bird should. If I could trade this coat for feathers, then starling